Warm welcome to everyone. Good day, everybody, for taking your time to join our Excellence in Breeding Module 3 Low Density Service Launch event. So we have a pretty short 4 presentations today. The first here's a slide on a couple agenda items that we'll be going through today. First, we'll start off with some opening remarks from Jan. He is our Excellence in Breeding Deputy Director, followed by a brief donor's perspective. Gary Atlin from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will be sharing some of his perspectives on the One CGIAR share services. And myself and my 2 colleagues from EiB Module 3 will be giving a high-level overview on the EiB genotyping tools and services, some key initiatives and updates, followed by a 10 minutes vendors sharing, and then we'll end the webinar with a 30 minutes Q&A session. So a housekeeping note here, so please post your questions in the chat box. And alternatively, you can also raise your hands, and then the host can also unmute you if you would prefer to ask your questions directly. So without further ado, I would pass the floor to our first speaker, Jan.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. Next slide, please. So at Excellence in Breeding, we really aim to drive change. And within the Excellence in Breeding platform, we have 5 modules, as you probably all know, what we call modules. So the first focuses on product design and kind of breeding structure management. And then the second on optimizing breeding schemes. And the third is what we're focusing on today at this meeting is genotyping and sequencing, providing services to our partners to help in this space. The fourth focuses on operations and phenotyping, mechanization, etc. And then the fifth is really breeding informatics that they provide. So then we also have Bish, who many of you know, who works across basically the modules, interacts and facilitates the partnerships with our national partners. And then we also have Liz, who many of you might know, Liz Jones, who focuses on adoption outreach, works across the modules to help with data management, digitization, and training for some of these systems.
Seems like you're having bandwidth problem, Jan, maybe.
Okay. Can you hear me, or is it interrupted?
You're coming in fine for me, Jan.
Okay.
Same for me, I can hear you properly.
Okay.
I think you're clear, Jan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next slide, please. So we've gone through a little bit of a change over the last few years, and in the last year, the funders, we formalized some questions, some basically 6 mandates from the funders that we're focusing on within Excellence in Breeding. And so the first is really, aligning breeding pipelines with market segments, and then, help to then design product profiles, target product profiles that are aligned with these market segments, and so then investment cases can be built around these product profiles. And then the next part is really focusing on, incentivization of the people that are trying to drive the change for these breeding programs and to deliver on these breeding programs, and so that they can then deliver on the genetic gain and focus on variety turnover, instead of just, you know, primarily publications or fundraising necessarily. The third mandate is really establishing an effective delivery mechanism for the varieties at the farmer's gate. And so having that transition, you know, going from breeding programs to how to reach the end user or the customer, the farmer. And then, of course, increased rate of genetic gain, making sure that we have that we utilize methodologies, principles, and also actions to reach that genetic gain, and how we best do that. And then we also have a commitment to shared services to help the centers be more effective in for example, implementing marker-assisted breeding or using genomic selection. And then part of it is that we're not just focusing on the CG, and that is why Vicious has this role of working with our national partners to really increase their capacity and you know, having a more smooth transition from the breeding lines to variety development with the national partners. And so that is really what we're trying to achieve here. And I guess this meeting really focuses on the commitment to shared services as we're introducing this intermediate platform for markers. On to the next slide, please. So, so besides these focus, these mandates that we're trying to focus on, EiB also manages crops to end hunger investments. And so part of that approach is, as one of the things we mentioned earlier, is you know, having looking across centers and really establishing, for example, testing sites that can really serve more than one crop or more than one center, and you know, kind of having a hub and spoke model for each sub-region where it makes sense. And then we also, you know, with these investments, we're focusing on achieving goals that and regions that are targeted, you know, by these funds, but also by the funders, as is dictated by them. And then really these centralized operation services within centers as well as across centers to acting as a full recovery service unit. So the idea is that the breeding programs, you know, really, as they're trying to do it themselves now, with more efficient and effective ways to deliver data or deliver services to the breeding programs. So part of that is that then we can ensure long-term sustainability, really help develop skill sets and proper handovers and succession plans, and then also focus on delivery of quality through specialization. People can then really hone in on what they're good at and utilizing these skills. So then that will result in efficiencies at the end. And then by combining that in centralized services, multiple crops can benefit from this. And then so development of these centralized business units. And so really partnerships is critical to the success. And so, you know, on the right are some examples of these centralized services that go beyond just genotyping, of course, is what we're here for during this meeting. part of that is developing the right protocols, logistics, systems, data standardization. And similarly for phenotyping, we can, take a similar approach. Also, we're thinking of soil testing through module 4, etc. And then, but also implementing health, safety, environment, and guidance and support through some centralized services. Anyway, so that is really what EIB is doing and focusing on. And I just, that is what I wanted to use as introduction to this session. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to, turn it over to Eng or Gary.
Thanks, Jan. So now we are on our second agenda item. So Gary Atland will be sharing some donors' perspectives on CGIAR shared services. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning or good evening to everybody, as the case may be. The development of shared services is an important element of the modernization of breeding systems, and as you are aware, the Gates Foundation has been one of the donor organizations strongly supporting the 6 areas of improvement to deliver higher rates of genetic gain that Jan ran through. So I'll just give you our perspective around the importance of these shared services and how they really look like they will be developing under One CGIAR. Next slide, please. Modern plant breeding, as you are all very aware, is a complex, data-driven activity that applies many technologies to the issues of population development and selection. Critical functions, some of which are the organizing idea for the EIB modules supporting different plant breeding activities would include design of the product, understanding what markets and clients want. So that requires a lot of help from social science and a fairly generic set of skills in many cases that could be applied across crops. Generation of segregating populations and selection candidates, genotyping, the different types of phenotyping that we have to do on selection candidates for productivity in the field, for end use quality, for disease resistance and stress tolerance, breeding value and genotypic value estimation. So taking that phenotypic data and genotypic information and integrating them into predictions of the value of a selection candidate, either as a cultivar or as a parent, and then the actual process of advancement and selection. The breeders are sort of like general contractors who need to make sure that all of these functions are correctly conducted and applied to the problem that they've been assigned, but they can't perform all of these functions effectively. And increasingly, we're seeing, as in the case of the low density diagnostic genotyping project that we're discussing today, that some of these services can be applied much more effectively if they're centralized and shared across many breeding programs within and across species. So next slide, please. And in general, these support services in the relatively small breeding programs and independently operating centers of the CGIAR have been pretty expensive and inefficient, and increasingly have acted as a drag on efforts to modernize the system, to accelerate breeding cycles, increase population sizes and deliver a higher rate of genetic gain. The lab services that we offer in-house are designed to serve a small clientele in one or a few species. They're often not state-of-the-art in terms of service provision. And quite importantly, they have limited bargaining power with suppliers of equipment and reagents. So we don't necessarily get the best prices. And a lot of similar issues affect field phenotyping. Generally speaking, mechanization of planting and harvesting is behind what you see in private sector organizations of the same size. Often there's no specialized support for equipment operation or maintenance. And of course, mechanized planting systems, mechanized harvesting systems are often for research purposes, very complex equipment. So you often have a breeder or a technician responsible for buying and maintaining equipment, and as a result, there's a lot of expensive but unused equipment sitting around the system. We have very individualized ways of applying new technologies like digital imaging for integrating into phenotyping and selection decisions. So the we have a situation now where very good commercial, for example, drone phenotyping services are available essentially as custom services, but we also have, groups in most centers working on essentially homemade applications of these systems. And we've been, an important area for us to standardize would be breeding information management. We've got a number of different systems in use. Some are widely used, like the BMS or BreedBase in the vegetatively propagated crops. There's a system in use at Erie that's been developed in-house. A lot of programs are just using spreadsheets and not using a database. It's really important for us, for the modernization effort, for application of genomic selection, to get most of the system onto a well-supported single product. Next slide, please. We've had some successful experiences with the implementation of shared services. One of the most successful at a single center that I'm aware of is the centralization of research services at Erie, which took place, I guess, from about 2014, 2015 onward on a big scale. The breeding programs at Erie were managed in a pretty typical way for the system, in that essentially each breeding team had its own procedures, a large crew that did all of the operations at peak times, hired in huge amounts of casual labor, transplanting and harvesting operations completely done by hand. And they've moved over the last, with the result that, often each breeder had his or her own piece of equipment, which they sort of hid away, and so that other people couldn't get at it and break or abuse it. They've centralized now most planting, harvesting, seed processing, and population development, crossing, and single seed descent functions at Los Baños. And the breeding teams are responsible for choosing parents, planning nurseries and trials, making the selection decisions. And this has greatly improved the throughput, reduce the cost per plot, and increase the accuracy of data that's being collected at Los Baños. Unfortunately, this would also need to be applied, elements of this system to other major sites, but Erie, like a number of the programs, is pretty heavily concentrated in terms of its total activity at headquarters, and so that's a reasonable place to start with these centralized research services. And One CG offers us an opportunity to really professionalize, strengthen, and centralize these types of services across crops. High Throughput Genotyping Project, the predecessor to the service that's being launched today, is probably the archetypal example of a shared service where the project leads negotiated a flexible but standardized contract with the service provider. There was a close collaboration between the project team, the main clients in the system, and the service provider, Intertech, in designing the system in such a way that the service provider and clients really understood each other's needs and capacities and were able to work together to increase volumes and reduce costs, allowing high quality results to be delivered. And this really made possible the routine adoption of diagnostic markers at scale by CGIAR breeders, and drove the system from very expensive and low density SSRs used not in a routine way to much higher density and cheaper SNPs that are used as an initial selection step, and as a result have also been made available to many of our national partners, commercial partners. Next slide, please. And One CGIAR presents a great opportunity to expand these types of shared services. Setting them up in the current system is extremely difficult because each center has its own purchasing, legal, and HR services and policies. So if you want to do something in a centralized way, you have to negotiate with each center's administrative structure. There's also a lot of concern about what happens to the small center-specific labs and services, what happens to those jobs. Sometimes inappropriate efforts to impede change that's going to do a better job of delivering on the objectives of the system. One CG will provide a common administrative framework and policies. This will take some time to put in place, but it should, over the next couple of years, greatly simplify purchasing, hiring, and contracting. And I keep my fingers crossed as I, say this, because we're, the proof will really be in the pudding. But it will also put in place a research leadership that has responsibilities and accountability above the level of the crop and center. And this should allow consolidation of labs and functions for greater efficiency. And we expect and hope that the result will be lower cost, higher quality support services, larger populations, higher accuracy, and greater genetic gains delivered to farmers. So it's very exciting to be at the start of this process and to have a couple of excellent examples like the genotyping service to use as our guide. Well, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary, for your insights and perspectives. We are just right now a couple minutes behind schedule, but we should be able to make up some time here in our next session. So I'm going to jump right in. So we have a two-part presentation today from the Module 3 group. So first, I would just like to take a brief moment to introduce the entire team. Myself, I am Eng-Hwa Ung. I'm the module lead for EiB, Genotyping Tools and Sequencing. I'm currently based in the Philippines, hosted by Erie. We have Ana Oliveira. She is our regional coordinator based in Kenya, and she's supporting all the regional genotyping needs in the region. And then we have a new joiner, Rajaguru Bohar. He recently transferred from the ICRASAT HTPG project over to EiB Module 3, and now he has a new role. His title is the Regional Genotyping Coordinator for South Asia and greater parts of Asia. So we have a website. Feel free to visit our website to find out more information. And this is our common shared email account. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any genotyping needs. So the first part, I would like to share with the group here some key initiatives that Module 3 is taking on this year. And I think a lot of this is touches on points that was recently made by Jan and Gary about some of these, multi-crop 1CG type initiatives. So for the next 5 or 6 slides or so, I'll be sharing in a little bit more details on some of the importance of these key initiatives, how they are actually supporting the 1CG agenda to centralize and to work more effectively across crops, and how the LDSG, or the shared genotyping services, is also playing an integral role in these initiatives. So first is development of a common strategy to enable centralized trait augmentation. So the main difference between trait augmentation versus the routine marker-assisted backcrossing or marker-assisted forward breeding is that trait augmentation focuses on delivering key traits into parental lines. So the end product of augmentation is not the final breeding product, but actually just better starting materials for breeding programs. So why are we doing this? So some of the learnings to date is that many production-ready traits are actually not present or easily accessible they're not present in elite backgrounds and not easily accessible by many programs. Having each program convert their own materials to add in these key traits is not very efficient. So ideally, this should be carried out in a very centralized manner with the support of a dedicated team to perform the augmentation proper with the well-designed RGA setup, with the proper informatics, and the use of shared genotyping platform. All this can be done in a very crop agnostic manner, although we typically have to give some considerations for inbred versus hybrid versus clonal crop to set up. But largely, majority of these operations and requirements will be very generic across crops, so it's easily can be centralized. So earlier part of this year, EiB had also mobilized a quite sizable crops and hunger funding to support the transition of multiple crops, key crops of CTEH into a centralized operation to carry out this trait augmentation. So more detailed strategies and business plans is expected to come out this year. In the next year or so, we hope that we'll be able to establish 1 or 2 key strategic hubs within each region. They will be identified and put into operation very soon. So how can LDSG can be leveraged to perform the initial QC, as many programs have done. This is very critical to establish authoritative seed sources. QTL profiling is also routinely done by many NARs program to collect the information needed so that we know where the trait gaps are. And by and large, the augmentation proper will definitely be using a lot of the low density platform that we have. So the next initiative is on genomic selection network. So to date, many breeding programs have started some form of genomic selections to replace conventional selection method. Many large bilateral projects, such as the Gates-funded AGG for wheat and maize, Agri for rice, Avisa for the dryland cereals and legumes, and NextGen for cassava, all have a very bold ambition to establish network-level genomic selection. However, to get the network started is no small task, and will definitely require a lot of planning. And to enable successful rollout of genomic selection and to achieve production scale, interdisciplinary support is a must. And proper utilization of tools and services are also very essential to make sure that this is done properly and in a very cost-effective manner. So genomic selection often requires marker densities in the thousands, a threshold where low-density platforms are no longer cost-effective. Well, however, there are actually a couple niches where LDSG can still be leveraged to prepare the CGIAR and NARs network to implement GS. Through the EiB NARs module, and similar to the earlier slide on trait augmentation, many programs actually, especially NARS, have been using LDSG extensively to perform initial QC and profiling, especially on these priority crops, just to get a base assessment of where these crops are, to make sure that we clean up the seeds, because GS, mid-density, typically they cost more. So it's much better that we clean up the seed sources and have a better place to start before we venture in and trigger a heavy investment in mid-density genotyping. So in 2021, many CGI programs or crop programs will start estimating GEBVs by end of 2021. This is actually a rather ambitious goal, and LDSG is certainly playing a very important role in the preparation and to support us in assessing the feasibility of large-scale rollout. In the near future, many of the key marker traits currently available through the low-density platform will also be validated and included on our new EiB mid-density platform. This is very critical for us to ensure that interoperability is maintained between the EiB low and mid-density shared services. So the third initiative that we are taking on is on development of strategic genomic resources. A common bottleneck for effective development and deployment of marker resources, activities such as QC panel development, forward breeding strategy design, even down to the design of genomic selection panels, is often hindered due to the lack of centralized and well-curated genomic resources. Without all the essential information being up to date, centrally stored, it is very challenging and time-consuming for crop genomic scientists to design and optimize markers and their strategies. The deficiency is most apparent in many of the smaller crops. When I say smaller crops, this means for CGIAR, the non-maize, rice, and wheat programs, where much of the informations are probably typically scattered across multiple public domains. And in some instances, even if the information are available, they're often dated because they were generated with older genotyping and sequencing technologies. For many crops, we also found out that many of the current references and whole genome sequences are biased towards diversity and land races, which limits their utility in core breeding purposes. So in 2021, EiB, with the support of Crops and Hunger funding, is planning to reorganize the available genomic resources and to supplement some reference assemblies and whole genome data where gaps are present. We plan to do this in a very collaborative way with multiple crop genomic leads, and the work will definitely be fully outsourced to ensure that we have a fast turnaround. All genomic information supported through EiB and CTH will be publicly available as a community resource. And in addition to that, we're also working closely with EiB Module 5 colleagues to ensure that proper informatics are developed to expedite future market development and analytics through EBS, or the enterprise breeding system. So the next initiative is on transitioning genotyping as part of the integrated service within breeding operation. I think Gary had touched on this, how Erie has also, spent a couple years in centralizing the breeding operation, and genotyping is definitely a key part of that centralization process. So often the true cost of genotyping and accessibility it varies across crops and centers. Offering a $2 per sample genotyping is actually not $2. Why so? Breeding programs often have to factor in various direct and indirect costs, given that we're in the CG, and then sometimes we have to pay certain taxes. Staff costs for sampling are often not included. There are consumable costs such as the sampling plates, and there's also IT costs and informatics costs to support the data interpretation. These are often not properly costed in when breeding programs go about doing their genotyping. So no doubt, better planning and centralization will drive the cost down. So to better support all the breeding programs, Module 3 will be taking on a series of small initiatives to secure better contracts on some of the routine consumables such as plates. And this will definitely go beyond just supporting breeding users with just providing access to genotyping services. We'll also be working closely with vendors and users to perform a much better forecasting and most importantly, moving the planning further upstream. Moving forward, we like to initiate planning at the start of the project instead of at the end of the current model, instead of the current model where we are typically doing the planning and forecasting on an annual basis after the project is funded. So better planning also ensures that genotyping volumes are more stabilized across years to avoid the dilemma of breeding programs having to only afford genotyping when funding is available. We're now working closely with a few operational teams at various centers. Again, Erie Integrative Research Support Platform is one very good example to ensure that we include all the critical genotyping requirements, such as F1QC and routine marker assisted selection as part of the line development costs. Ultimately, like many large private seed companies, breeding programs should be given data point allocations based on their scale or operation and objectives. No doubt this will be definitely less hassle for the breeders. With the One CGIAR transition, we may actually soon have this ability to bulk purchase data points for all the programs, and will certainly also give us an extra edge or leverage to further drive our genotyping costs down. To further elaborate on the previous slide on genotyping as an integrated service, we're also piloting a business model with one of our partner programs to expand the existing crop-centric genotyping support service to a multi-crop by region operational model. Recently, there's been an announcement from One CGIAR management on efforts to consolidate all existing CGIAR research units into 3 main groups. One of the proposed group is genetic innovation, where all the breeding operations, gene bank operations, and integrated breeding support services will be housed. We do believe that this business model, which we are piloting right now, can be a very good use case on how some of the cross-cutting services, such as genotyping, can be effectively scaled and transitioned into the new One CGIAR operational structure to provide regional support, to streamline, and to ease the burden of breeding programs. And one added benefit of the proposed model is that if successfully executed, will also provide additional financial buffer to existing support services within centers, as these support units no longer have to rely solely on internal project funding and will have a much broader clientele to serve. If there's a need for genotyping support, let's say sampling, the regional teams should be able to quickly mobilize, and they'll be strategically placed to support the local needs. And then in terms of staffing and capacity development, this is also a very new way of operation that allows, that provides actually new career pathways for many existing members to transition from their current roles of generating in-house genotyping data into more of a coordinating role with greater room for career expansion. Now, moving on to the second part of the Module 3 updates, I would like to pass the floor over to my colleague, Rajaguru, to share some updates on the low density genotyping service proper. Rajaguru, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Singh. Thanks for the nice introduction and a clear overview of Module 3 EiB objectives, especially in the context of One CGIAR. So I would like to give you an overview of LDSG, the Low Density Genotyping Services. So with Module 3 shared services, we are targeting on 3 platforms. Currently, we have this low and mid density operational, and then the high density is still in the planning phase. There's no one size fits all, in terms of platform for all breeding applications. Depending on the crop status and resource availability, there are some options we would recommend. So coming to the LDSG, which is low density SNP genotyping services, most suited for trait specific marker assisted selection, and in some cases the background recovery, and especially the QA and QC applications. So if you see in 2020, most of the centers, they started developing these QA markers, which is already available with the platform. So this is also cost effective for markers less than 50 per sample. And then especially useful when considering the rapid turnaround needed, especially in terms of selection in the RGA setup or seed increase for the purity test. Coming to the mid-density genotyping services, shortly the MDSG, best suited for genomic selection and fingerprinting. Marker density typically in thousands, less forgiving than the low density platform, which can be used by programs with some basic capacity on genomics and bioinformatics. May or may not be applicable for all CGIAR crops at the moment. We have a few crops on board and few crops are in progress. So we are trying to replicate the same model for the MDSG as we have for the LDSG genotyping. So in this case, the interoperability can be of a little bit an issue. Coming to the HDSG, which is still in progress, so which is the most expensive per sample cost. This is also high species space dependent. And the range may be, like from 100,000 to millions of data points. This can be best used for creating of elite parental reference, as Singh mentioned earlier. So this will be well executed. High quality data can be leveraged for deployment of GS as well as development of low density marker. Strong consideration for bioinformatic capacity is much required for this HDSG. Next slide, please. So I would like to give you a little bit of background on how we started from HTPG and then to transition to this LDSG. So continuing the legacy of HTPG, most of you present here are one or the other way already knew about the project and what's the modality of the operations, and most of you are the contributors of the marker or the beneficiary as a user breeding group. So since the HTPG project ends at December 2020, this was transitioned to EiB and is still continuing as LDSG. So only the branding has changed, mostly the operations will remain same. So technically all the partners and users can be accommodated under the umbrella of One CGIAR. The module 3 will be helping the coordination and support in terms of sampling crew, as well as on the ways to minimize direct and indirect cost. Let's say, procuring the consumables, let's say your plates in a bulk, so that reduce the cost for the user, and also help you in setting up charge account that help you in reducing the administrative cost. And also will be, the contact point for the vendors, reducing the burden for you to, keeping back and forth between the conversations. So coming to the pricing, it really depends on, the end user, who you are, whether you are coming from a public institute or the private institute, the CGIAR or national partner. So we would recommend for better clarity and planning, kindly contact us through the email for all your genotyping needs and also better planning of your experiments. Next slide, please. So what is the way forward for low density platform right from HTPG? So if technically speaking, so there might be very little change or no visible changes at all. So coming into the transition into the EiB. So the LDSG will be completely supported through the excellence in breeding. And then as the previous speaker explained, the process of centralization of your trait integration and then the future modes of funding genotyping. This will be better aligned for this low density and mid density with the module 3 genotyping services. And then the mode of funding, earlier we used to give the free samples for the first time user, development cost. So those kind of activity will be continued, but will be, in terms of, not in terms of US dollar allocation, it will be in terms of data point allotment for the center. So that will be the future way of funding. So it's a justifiable requirement that we transfer to the module 3 to better align with the objectives and expertise of other modules. Let's take the development of sample manager from the module 5. We take the expertise from them, which will greatly helpful in the operation of low density and mid density workflow, and also the NARs module for the deployment of trait centralization and taking the product profile, and then must have traits. Those trait information can be used for the market development and things like that. So this will be handled between the service agreement between EiB and Intertech, and as earlier, our target is to still achieve a better price and maintaining the objectives of good quality data. Next slide, please. So coming to the pricing, what is changed from HTPG to LDSG? So we try to keep the pricing as such. There will not be no visible change. If changes, might be a very little changes. So before structuring this pricing, we done a homework on earlier job submission. We seen that 60% of the jobs were in terms of 384 sample submission. And within that, 70% of the sample submission requires 1 to 15 SNP. And then if you see the NARs and the new user, almost 90% they were submitting in terms of 384 sample. Considering these two important aspects, we kept the pricing of 1 to 10 SNP unchanged. That's remain the branding like $2 or $2.5 whether you submit a sample in terms of 384 or 1536. Coming to the 384, since most of the NARs and the new user, they use this 384. So we normalize the cost and then reduce the cost beyond more than 10 SNP, especially for the benefit of NARs and new user. Coming to the 1536 standard pricing, there will be a negligible changes. Even we try to reduce the cost beyond the 20 SNP, and then if you see the third component of discounted pricing, what we call as 1536 flexi. So because of the impact of COVID and the availability of consumables, some of the price hike in consumables. So there was a requirement to increase the pricing because of reduced discounted prices. So probably there might be a 10 to 20% increase in the 1536 flexi standard. And then if you go beyond certain number of SNPs, we have now the implementation of mid-density genotyping. So that might be an additional option for you. So together this, we would recommend you always contact us for any queries or planning the genotyping experiment for budgeting. We will try to give you a best option and give you most cost-effective ways of genotyping. So now I would like to welcome Anna and hand over this session. Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Rajaguru, thank you to all for your presence. So to help in achieving the targets described previously by Dr. Jan, Dr. Gary, Eng, and Rajaguru, we have CGIAR tools that help on this. These tools include the EiB CASP marker lists for at least 10 organisms, and the description of the mid-density panels already existing, and that can be immediately used. Next slide, please. So all are very easy and comprehensive tools to consult. And as already presented before in another presentation, but we can go together on this. You go to the EiB website and following for the EiB modules. If you click in genotyping and sequencing, you will find a brief description of all available services. Please, next slide. And here you can find the low and mid density genotyping, where you can find a description, and in addition to the CASP marker list, each can find the markers that exist and that were validated by molecular breeders from the CG and outside of the CG system. We can also find a description on the toolbox materials. So you will understand what is the background and how you can use it. Next slide, please. So here is an example where you can find the description and also the toolbox. Regarding how the module 3 workflow works, so it's also very easy to follow and to understand. And starts by filling the form and confirming the samples in the field, collecting the samples, complete the phytosanitary certificate, the vendor's form, commercial invoice with our help, ship the samples with the copy of all documentation. The EIB contacts the vendor to inform that they will receive shortly the samples. And when the samples arrive with the vendor, they will check the form and if the samples are in the right conditions. So if everything will be fine, the vendor will follow up for the DNA extraction, sequencing and genotyping within 10 to 15 days. And we'll prepare the results that will be sent for implementation. So these are very straightforward and ready to use and available to all. So the tools that are also, in addition, available for everybody, not only the low density CASP and mid density marker database that is continuously updated. So for low density, we already have at least 11 crops and we have also fish. And for the mid density, it's already available for everybody, the description for potato, bread wheat, and very soon we will include cowpea. We also have 3 tutorials and this needs to be updated because the things are changing very fast and more will be available until the end of the year. If everything will be fine, depending on the COVID situation in all the world, we will start also with the regional workshops during this year. In addition, we are also developing with the help of Venice sample tracker. So it's a web application that enables efficient tracking of genotyping sample submissions for all the EIB genotyping services. And the target is to reduce the human error introduced by manual form filling, because now we are doing everything manually. So this application will need not an installation and will be accessible as a web application. So the goal, again, is to facilitate the sample tracking all the way from partners to approval coming from the lab manager to Intertech vendor. Sample tracker. So in the end, what we really want is to eliminate all the delays that is currently done because we are doing everything manually. So let me to mention that this work is independent from the EBS development, and the target is to release this application by June 2021. So finalizing from our end, this work would not be possible without the outstanding collaboration and support of all partners, donors, vendors. And this presentation, we will end by saying a very big thanks to all.